So, about a year ago this time, we offered a service which was inspired by Ernie Steck, who had reached out to me as representing the aging group. And he said, we have a wonderful bridging ceremony when our youth graduate and transition into adulthood. And maybe it would be nice to have some type of ceremony for the elders in the congregation. And that was a lovely sentiment. So I started thinking about what something like that might look like. And I asked some people what they thought about doing something like that. And the question I kept getting back was, well, what does that look like? Who's an elder? Is it determined only by age? Because I don't feel old, even though my age might determine that I am. Transition to what? And when? Does that mean 60 is old or 70 or 80? And so there wasn't a lot of clarity around that. And so what I realized that it was not just as simple as creating a one size fits all ritual. Our bridging ceremony that we do every spring with our graduating seniors in high school is specific. I realize it's a ceremony for teenagers who are graduating from high school or moving on into their early young adulthood. But the task that Ernie had suggested was a little bit more elusive. And so when Meg was talking about her time for all ages today, the faces of change, I was reminded of that service we did last year and how things do change, and yet they stay the same. We are the same people in those pictures, and yet we aren't. My little baby picture showed me with white hair, and I was at my hairdresser not too long ago with Danny, and Danny was getting her hair a little bit highlighted or whatever. And I was talking about how blonde I am. And Maria, who didn't know me as a 2-year-old, was like, Wendy, your hair's brown. And I'm like, no, it's not. And she's like, it is. It's only blonde because I colored it. And I'm like, but I've always been blonde, because in my mind, that little girl with that head of hair is who I've always been. But that isn't necessarily who we are, and it is who we are. It's kind of that fun both and. And one of my favorite quotes that I have shared numerous times here, because I love it so much, was from one of our beloved elders named Bill Timer, who told me as we were moving all of the boxes from the church over at the Congregational church that we were sharing with as we were moving into this new building. He had just carried a box in, and he set it down, and he looked at me in complete seriousness. And he said, Wendy, I have to tell you, this 92-year-old body just doesn't move the way it did at 88. And he was totally serious. It wasn't, this 92-year-old body isn't moving the way it did at 30 or 40 or 50. Nope, it was 88. And so as I think today about what faces of change means and what that means in our own lives, it goes back to me the concept of wisdom. And so that's what I told Ernie last year. I was like, well, what if instead of having a service around our chronological age, what if we had a service that revolved around wisdom and the lessons learned as we grow older? And so as I began to reflect on wisdom, I realized wisdom is eternal. And true wisdom can and will transcend place, age, and time. So there is wisdom that can be gleaned and shared by all of us, no matter what chronological age we find ourselves experiencing at any one period of time. And so as I share with you today, I invite you to be thinking about some words of wisdom you have gleaned throughout the years in your own life. And I invite us to share wisdom with one another, maybe during coffee hour, or if we have a little bit of time after my sermon. But for many years, I've been interested, and I've shared some of this before, but I've been interested in trying to distinguish the difference between wisdom and knowledge. Because wisdom and knowledge are two very different things. We can know something in our head, but it's not really wisdom until it goes into our heart, I think. And so wisdom is knowing something on the deepest level and then using our power of discernment to know what to do with it, bridging the gap between intellect and true inner knowing. That's kind of my definition of wisdom. But I also like what Ann Wilson Schaaf says. She says, wisdom is knowledge that has been tested with time and has a pattern of the ages upon it. I'm going to say that again. Wisdom is knowledge that has been tested with time and has the pattern of the ages upon it. One of my friends who I take some metaphysical classes with has said, until a thought becomes a living truth, it is not wisdom. Until a thought becomes a living truth, it is not wisdom. And the example that he always uses is, he says, I may know that I need to be more patient. That may take 1-2 seconds. I know that I need to be more patient. But it might take me 30 years to become patient. And that is a 30 years well spent. One of my good friends is a chaplain at Hope West and often shares short accounts of some of his profound moments in his role as a chaplain over there. And a few years ago, he shared these 2 short reflections that I've shared here before, but I'm going to share again. He wrote, and he put these on his Facebook page. He wrote, 92 years old, he had one goal before he died. Having served as a paratrooper over Europe during World War II, he wanted to parachute one more time. Hospice thought, why not? His hospice team contacted a local tandem parachute company and they agreed to the jump. The hospice CNA transported him in a wheelchair van to Moab, Utah. This honored veteran, who needed assistance to stand, made a successful tandem jump. Somewhere between heaven and earth, he was a young man again. Somewhere between heaven and earth, he was a young man again. Scott shared another reflection. A lesson I learned, which has influenced me ever since. I visited a man who was 92 years old, blind and hard of hearing. When he was young, he had served as a chaplain in the trenches of World War I. Before I left, he asked me to pray for him. I have much to do in my service to the Lord, he said. I looked at this frail man sitting in a wheelchair and asked, what do you still have to do? He was silent and then replied, the scripture says, your old men will dream dreams. Pausing, he smiled and continued, I have dreams to dream. Now, 25 years later, as a chaplain, I too hold out hope that meaning and purpose is present in any setting or circumstance. I think there's some wisdom in my chaplain friend being able to learn and glean some of the wisdom from the people he works with. Last year at this service that I was talking about, we asked some of the kids what wisdom is. And Phoebe said, the earth is like a disco ball. It spins around and all of the shiny things in it are the people and animals and plants. Plants are alive too. The wisdom of children reminding us of our interconnected web, the things that they understand in those first few years of life. And so when I asked today in my reflection, our reflection, is there wisdom that your younger self can give to who you are now? That is a serious question because we so often think we get wiser as we get older. And that is true, but if wisdom is eternal and it transcends time and space, like I also just said, is it not possible that we have had wisdom here in our hearts, in our minds with us through every stage of life? And is it possible that we may have forgotten some of the wisdom we already knew as we have layers upon layers upon layers of living that go on top of us? Have we lost some of that wisdom that we had as children? When Danny was just 9, I asked her, what can you do with somebody that feels sad? And she said, you can just go ask them if there's anything you can do for them. For example, if they want a companion or if they would like you to stay with them. If they say no, respect that, and that's okay too. Sometimes they don't want you to stay with them. But if they do say yes, then you can just sit with them and be their friend. The wisdom of a 9-year-old. And so I invite us today, as we are all at different stages of life, entering into different stages of life, to offer ourselves some kindness, some compassion, some gentleness with where we are now. If there's some need for some self-forgiveness for where we have been in the past, I invite us to offer ourselves that also. And if there is some fear about where we're going into the future, I invite us to maybe open our hearts with some optimism and joy to know that every stage of life is valued and is sacred. I remember when I was pregnant with Nathaniel or Danny, or I can't remember when, but I asked my mom, I think it was when I had 2 little toddlers and they were kind of driving me crazy. And that's that stage when you think it's never going to end. And I asked my mom, I said, well, when we were little, like, what was your favorite stage of life? And she said, well, thinking about it, I haven't really had a favorite stage of life because I enjoyed every stage. My parents had fun being newly married without children, and then they enjoyed having young children. but they also enjoyed having high schoolers, and they went and they watched our sports events. And then without even thinking about it, they kind of embraced becoming grandparents. And as I was thinking about these spaces of change in my parents' house that I was just at this week, my mom doesn't have baby pictures up. She has pictures of who her grandchildren are now. She doesn't hold on to who they were. She wants the world to see who they are now. And I always I think about that. It seems like she lets go of some of that easier than I do, but she is always kind of embracing the next phase. And I arrived on Tuesday, and I was informed that it was a good thing I brought my tennis racket, because I had been recruited to play tennis with them on Friday morning at 7 o'clock. So at 7 o'clock in the morning, I was out playing tennis with 3 80-year-olds. And I was thinking to myself, who I am now at 50. And it wasn't who I am at 50 versus who they are at 80, but is who I am at 80. Will I be as active and as healthy as who they are? And if this is what they were like at 80, do I remember who my parents were at 50? And I don't really have any answers to that. I was just reflecting on that. And so then, how do my children understand me today? And how will they understand me in 10 years? And how will they understand themselves? And so I don't have any major answers about that, but the thought for today is to allow us to just think about that tapestry of life that we're in, from childhood to young adulthood to middle age. And as we get older, are we willing to embrace it a little bit? And I'm going to close today with some words of wisdom from one of my favorite people, a man named Dwayne, who we were talking as we were planning his wife's memorial service, Arlita. And we were joking because Arlita always came to my building your own theology class, but she was a staunch atheist and she never really wanted to be there because she didn't think what we were talking about was really relevant. But Dwayne said, Arlita decided that she was an atheist and she was done with it. I'm still not finished with it. I'll die one of these days, and I still won't be finished. None of us are finished. I'm just going to say that again and let us reflect on that. I'm still not finished with it. I'll die one of these days, and I still won't be finished. And now let us sing together number 131 in your gray hymnal, Love Will Guide Us.